There are moments in life when the universe seems to nudge you, ever so gently, toward the truth. Not in some grand, dramatic fashion with lightning bolts and ominous music, but in small, almost laughable ways. Like realizing you've been talking to yourself for a full 5 minutes because the person you thought was listening stopped paying attention after the first sentence. Or when your wife, the same woman who used to text you reminders about doctor's appointments and dry cleaning pickups, suddenly forgets to mention that she was at an event last weekend. One that, according to a coworker, was quite the spectacle: music, drinks, and laughter, none of which, apparently, required a husband. Now, I don't consider myself paranoid. I like to think I'm a pretty rational guy. But rational people don't ignore the fact that their wife, who once complained about wearing heels for more than 20 minutes, suddenly has a newfound enthusiasm for long nights out in suspiciously fancy shoes. So, naturally, I asked Nicole about it. Casually. Over dinner. "Oh, right," she said, stabbing at her salad like it had personally offended her. "I told you about that." "No," I replied, sipping my drink. "No, you didn't." She looked up, blinked, and then laughed, a little too hard, a little too forced. "I could have sworn I mentioned it." "You didn't." "Well, it wasn't a big deal. I could have let it go. I could have decided that maybe, just maybe, she really did forget. That maybe, between work stress and her newfound passion for not being home, it slipped her mind. But here's the thing about marriage: you know when someone is lying to you. Not because they're terrible at it, though, let's be honest, most people are, but because you know them. You know their tells. Their habits. The way their voice shifts ever so slightly when they're trying too hard to sound casual. And Nicole? Nicole was trying very hard. So, I did what any self-respecting man would do. I pretended not to notice. See, people think confrontation is the best way to get the truth. That if you just demand answers, you'll get them. But no pressure makes people dig in their heels. They deny, deflect, spin stories that somehow make you the villain. But if you wait, if you play along, the truth will find you. And, oh boy, did it find me. A week later, Nicole came home with that same strange energy she'd been carrying around for months. Distracted. Somewhere else. Except this time, she had a gift. "Thought of you today," she said, tossing something onto the counter. It was a book. A biography of some historical figure she knew I couldn't stand. "I thought you liked this guy?" I stared at her, then at the book, then back at her. "You mean the guy I've ranted about at least 6 times? She blinked. "Oh, well, I thought you liked history." "Sure. The same way you like cooking, which, for the record, you don't." She laughed, waved me off, and disappeared upstairs. And that's when it clicked. Nicole wasn't thinking about me when she bought that book. She was thinking about someone else. Someone who does like that historical figure. Someone she'd been spending enough time with to confuse their interests with mine. Now, I could have taken the direct route, demanded to know who it was, yelled, maybe broken something dramatic like a glass. But instead, I did what any husband with a sense of humor and a mild interest in chaos would do. I started talking about our book. At breakfast, "I'm actually really excited to read that book you got me. We should read it together." At lunch, "I was thinking we could go see that documentary about him. You know, since you thought I liked him." At dinner, "You know what's weird? The guy at work, Josh, he's obsessed with this guy. Just like you thought I was. Crazy, right?" By the third day, Nicole was visibly stressed. She'd laughed too loudly, changed the subject too quickly, and once even tried to accidentally spill coffee on the book. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for. She came home one evening, clearly exhausted, dropped onto the couch, and groaned. "Okay. I have to tell you something." I sat down beside her, looking as innocent as possible. "Yeah?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Never mind." "Oh, Nicole." I smiled, patted her knee, and stood up. "Cool. By the way, I ran into Josh today. He thinks it's hilarious that you thought I liked that book." He said he's been talking about it for months. I guess you guys must have chatted about it a lot, huh? And just like that, her face drained of color. Now, I'm not a petty man. But there is something deeply satisfying about watching the exact moment someone realizes they've been caught without you ever having to accuse them of a thing. She stammered, laughed nervously, then went straight into defense mode. Josh? Oh, no, I mean, yeah, we talk at work, but not like that. It's just, I hear things and maybe I got mixed up, that's all. Aha. I nodded, biting back a smirk. Totally understandable. I mean, it's not like you've been spending so much time with him that you've started associating his interests with mine. Silence. Right? I pressed, my voice all mock innocence. More silence. Nicole suddenly remembered something urgent she had to do upstairs. I let her go. After all, the best part of the game is watching how the opponent plays when they realize they're losing. The next morning, she was unusually affectionate. Making coffee, asking about my day, even suggesting a weekend trip, something she hadn't done in years. Guilt is a funny thing. I played along, watching, waiting. Because here's the thing, when people lie, they don't stop. They double down. They get nervous. And eventually, they slip. And when Nicole slipped, well, let's just say, I was ready. There are a few ways to confirm if your wife is cheating. Some guys check phone records. Others hire private investigators. Me? I used a folding chair. Let me explain. It started at work. My coworker, Derek, was rambling about a backyard project, and I was only half listening until he mentioned buying security cameras. Not for safety, not for theft prevention, but because his neighbor kept stealing his folding chairs. Now, most people would focus on the obvious crime here, the stolen chairs. But my brain went somewhere else. Security cameras. Cheap. Discreet. Easy to install. I spent my lunch break researching options. Turns out, you can get a decent one for less than a night out at a mediocre restaurant. By the end of the day, I had one in my cart, express shipping selected. It arrived the next evening. Nicole was working late again, which made installation easy. I put the thing in the living room, angled it toward the front door, and linked it to my phone. Nothing fancy. Just a little experiment. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, nothing. The third night, Nicole came home at 11:42 p.m. with the energy of someone who had just won a free vacation. She was grinning, humming, practically bouncing. I checked the footage. The front door had opened at 11:41. A minute before she walked in, there was a guy standing there. Right outside. He didn't come in. Didn't knock. Just stood there for a second before heading back toward the street. Interesting. The next morning, Nicole acted normal. Well, her version of normal. Asking about my plans, making sure I'd be busy later that evening. I nodded, pretending to think. Yeah, I might be home late tonight. Not sure yet. She barely hid her relief. That was confirmation enough. I ordered a second camera. This one went outside, right above the door. Nothing too obvious, but angled enough to catch the street. Now I wasn't just watching her. I was watching who dropped her off. 3 nights later, I got my answer. At 12:06 a.m., Nicole was dropped off by a car I didn't recognize. A gray sedan. Tinted windows. The best part? She didn't get out right away. For a solid minute, she sat there, talking to the driver. Laughing. At one point, she reached over and did the classic affectionate shoulder squeeze. Then, because apparently, the universe wanted me to win, she got out, leaned back in, and said something before closing the door. I zoomed in. She was smiling. The kind of smile you don't fake. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time. Now, I could have confronted her right then. Could have printed out screenshots, slapped them on the fridge like some twisted art exhibit.
But that wasn't enough. I needed more. So, I got creative. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked to borrow her car. Nicole looked up from her phone, startled. Why? Oil change, I lied. Figured I'd take care of it for you. She hesitated, but what could she say? No, because some mystery man's been in the passenger seat and I don't want you finding out? She handed over the keys. The second I got in, I checked the seat adjustment. Moved back. Way back. Too far back for Nicole's legs. Too far back for mine. Now, I'm not a detective, but I do know basic logic. If neither of us sits like that, then someone else does. I grabbed my phone, opened my notes, and added another checkmark to my list of reasons Nicole is a lying liar who lies. When I got home, I tossed her the keys like nothing happened. All set. She smiled, relieved. That was mistake number 2. Mistake number 1? Thinking I wouldn't notice. Nicole never cared about car maintenance. In all the years we'd been together, she never once asked about an oil change, a tire rotation, or why the check engine light had been on for 3 months straight. But suddenly, after I borrowed her car that one time, she became deeply, profoundly interested in it. You know, she said that evening, leaning against the counter, I was thinking about getting my car detailed. I nodded, pretending to be absorbed in my phone. Yeah? Yeah, like a deep clean. Inside and out. I scrolled mindlessly. Since when do you care about that? She hesitated. I just think it'd be nice. It's been a while. Translation: I need to erase whatever evidence is in that car before you find it. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. That's a great idea, I said, smiling. I'll take it in for you tomorrow. Her face barely moved, but I caught it, the split-second flicker of panic before she covered it up. Oh, no, you don't have to do that. I don't mind, I said. I already know a good place. No, really, I can do it. I shrugged. Okay. But, I'd do it soon. That passenger seat's been adjusted so far back, it's practically in the trunk. And just like that, she froze. Not long, just half a second. But enough. She forced a laugh. Oh. Yeah. I think I had a coworker in the car last week. That must be why. Which coworker? She blinked. What? You said a coworker. Who? Her brain scrambled for an answer. I could almost hear it overheating. Jessica. Jessica. A woman who was 5'2" and barely tall enough to reach the pedals, let alone need the seat pushed back far enough for an NBA player. I nodded, keeping my face blank. Cool. That was it. I didn't need to say anything else. The damage was done. The next morning, I left for work like usual. But instead of actually going to work, I parked a block away from the house and waited. At 10:17 a.m., Nicole left. Not in her car. No, she got into someone else's, a gray sedan. I didn't even need to check the footage. I already knew. I followed from a safe distance, careful not to get too close. Turns out, following someone isn't that hard when they assume you're at work and have no reason to be paranoid. They didn't go to a fancy place. No secluded romantic getaway. Just a boring office complex on the other side of town. The kind of place where you rent a unit for an independent business venture that never actually takes off. She got out, walked inside, and disappeared. I checked the time. 10:34 a.m. She wasn't due back at work for another hour and a half. I parked and waited. 38 minutes later, Nicole walked out, fixing her hair. A man followed behind her. Older. Clean cut. The kind of guy who still tucks his shirt into his jeans. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But they didn't have to. The way she looked at him said everything. She got back into the gray sedan. I watched them leave. Then I went home. And I waited. Nicole came home that evening acting like she hadn't spent her morning in an office complex with some middle-aged tucked-in shirt guy. She walked in, set her bag down, and gave me the usual, "Hey, how was your day?" in that breezy, casual voice people use when they're hoping you don't look too closely at them. I looked up from my laptop and shrugged. Same as usual. You? She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering, which was all I needed to know that whatever she was about to say next was complete nonsense. "Oh, just work stuff," she said, moving toward the fridge. "Meetings, emails, the usual." I nodded. "Yeah? Who'd you meet with?" Nicole paused, her back still turned to me. "Just long enough for me to enjoy the moment." "Just the team," she said, reaching for a bottle of water. "You know how it is." I smiled. Of course. She had no idea. I let her go about her evening, watching from the corner of my eye as she scrolled through her phone, responding to texts with just a little too much concentration. Probably texting him, planning whatever secret little schedule they had. She had no idea that her schedule was now my schedule. The next day, I took a personal day from work. Not because I needed rest, but because I had a mission. Step 1, find out who this guy was. The gray sedan was a rental easy enough to figure out, considering the barcode sticker on the back window. That meant he either didn't live here or wanted to avoid leaving a trail. Either way, he wasn't as smart as he thought. Step 2, figure out his routine. I already knew the office complex. I knew when Nicole met him. All I had to do was see where he went next. At exactly 10:20 a.m., I parked outside the office complex and waited. Nicole arrived 6 minutes later. She didn't park close. Instead, she got out of her car and walked around to the back entrance, like she'd done this before. Like they had a system. I watched as the door opened, and there he was. The same guy. Button-down shirt, neatly combed hair, the kind of guy who probably still called people sport unironically. I watched them talk, all smiles and comfortable body language. Not just coworkers. Not even just friends. This was something else. I stayed put as they went inside. 39 minutes later, she came out first. Same routine. Fixing her hair, checking her phone. A minute later, he came out, looking around like a man who wasn't used to sneaking around but thought he was doing a great job of it. He got into his rental and drove off. I followed. Turns out, Mr. Secret Meetings wasn't very exciting. He drove to a quiet suburban street and pulled into a driveway. Not a hotel. Not some hidden rendezvous spot. Just a normal house with a nice lawn and an overpriced porch swing. I parked a few houses down, pulled out my phone, and ran a quick search on the address. And there it was. His name, right there in the public records. David Langford. I took a screenshot and saved it. Now, I just had to wait. Waiting is an underrated skill. People think you have to act immediately when you find something out, but that's how you ruin a perfectly good plan. You wait. You let people relax. You let them think they're still getting away with it. And then, when they least expect it, then you make your move. Nicole didn't suspect a thing. The next day, she was in a great mood. Smiling, texting, humming to herself like a woman who thought life was going perfectly. I decided to have some fun. "So, I was looking up real estate today," I said casually over breakfast. Nicole looked up, surprised. Yeah? Yeah. Just checking out different neighborhoods. Seeing what's out there." She frowned slightly. "Are we moving?" "Maybe." I shrugged. "Just exploring options. There's this one area that seems nice. Really quiet. Good-sized houses. Decent schools, too." "Where?" I took a sip of my coffee. "Langford Drive." Nicole froze for a millisecond. A normal person wouldn't have noticed. But I did. "Never heard of it," she said quickly,
turning her attention back to her phone.
"Oh, it's nice," I said. "Actually, I think I saw someone I know in that area yesterday."
She didn't look up.
Yeah.
Small world.
Nicole kept scrolling.
But her grip on the phone was just a little tighter than before.
Over the next few days, I gathered more information. David Langford was a married man. 2 kids. A nice, predictable life.
The kind of guy who probably went to the same barber for 20 years and thought switching brands of toothpaste was adventurous. The kind of guy who shouldn't be sneaking around with another man's wife. The next time Nicole had one of her late nights, I made my move. Not to her. To him. I waited until he got home. Then I walked up to his house and rang the doorbell. It took a few seconds before he answered. When he did, he looked at me like I was a salesman or a lost delivery driver. "Can I help you?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah. You really can." He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. He was too busy with her to notice me. "Do we know each other?" he asked. "We should," I said. "Since you've been spending time with my wife." His face went pale. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo I'd taken of them outside the office, and held it up. "Want to explain this?" He stared at it, his mouth opening and closing like a fish that had just been pulled out of the water. "Listen, I cut him off. Save it. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to yell. I just wanted to see your face when you realized you got caught." David looked like he wanted to sink into the earth. "Please, don't." "Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to tell your wife." Relief flickered in his eyes. "I'm going to let Nicole do that." And with that, I turned around and walked away. David Langford had the exact reaction I was hoping for. The moment I walked away, he stood frozen in his doorway, staring at my back like I had just handed him a live grenade and casually strolled off. And in a way, I had. He had no idea what I was going to do next. I liked that. By the time I got home, Nicole was already there, lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up as I walked in. "Hey," she said, like a completely normal wife greeting a completely normal husband. "Hey," I said back, matching her energy. She didn't suspect a thing. Over the next few days, I let her sit in her little fantasy world where she thought she was still in control. She'd hum to herself while getting ready in the mornings, ask me about my day as if I wasn't 2 steps ahead of her. It was actually kind of impressive how smoothly she carried on, how she convinced herself everything was fine. But cracks were starting to form. I'd catch her watching me out of the corner of her eye when she thought I wasn't looking. Small hesitations in her usual routine. She knew something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. I was about to help her figure it out. Now, the average guy in my position would do something predictable. Maybe confront her in a dramatic scene, or worse, sink into some pathetic, heartbroken state. But me? I had a better idea. See, Nicole wasn't just cheating. She was lying with confidence. That was the part that really got me. She didn't think I'd ever catch on. She believed she was smarter than me. That was her biggest mistake. Because if there's one thing I enjoy, it's making people realize they're not as clever as they think. So, I set the trap. It started small. One morning, I casually mentioned that my company was thinking about transferring me to a different branch out of state. "Nothing's decided yet," I told her, "but it could be a big opportunity." Nicole, to her credit, barely flinched. Just smiled and said, "That's exciting. When would that even happen?" "Not sure," I shrugged. "Maybe a few months. They're still working out the details." She nodded, but I could see the gears turning in her head. That night, she spent a little too long on her phone. I didn't even need to check, I already knew who she was texting. The next step was even better. A week later, I told her I had a work trip coming up. "Couple of days," I said, packing a bag in front of her.
Just meetings and boring stuff. She didn't ask any questions. Just smiled and said, "I'll miss you." Of course, I wasn't actually going anywhere.
I parked 2 streets away from our house and waited. At 10:48 p.m., her car left the driveway. I followed, watching as she made the all-too-familiar trip to the office complex. She pulled into the back parking lot, like always, and walked inside.
This time, I didn't just sit back and watch.
I waited 10 minutes, then walked right up to the front door and let myself in.
The office was quiet.
Most of the businesses in the building were closed at this hour, except for one, the place where David worked. I made my way down the hall, stopping just outside his door.
Laughter. Hushed voices. I didn't need to see what was happening inside. I already knew.
So, I pulled out my phone, opened the audio recorder, and hit record.
Then, I knocked. Silence. Then, shuffling.
Then, the door cracked open, and there he was, David Langford, looking like a man who just got caught with his hand in the cookie jar.
"Hey, buddy," I said, smiling.
His face went pale. I didn't wait for him to speak.
I held up my phone. "You might want to listen to this later," I said. "It's a real interesting conversation."
Nicole appeared behind him, her face draining of color the second she saw me.
I turned to her. "Oh, hey, honey. Didn't expect to see you here."
She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she had no idea what to say.
Perfect. I handed David a flash drive.
"What's this?" he asked, staring at it like it might explode.
"A little collection of all the times you and Nicole met up," I said. "Security footage. Text logs. Call records." His eyes widened. "How did you?" I cut him off.
"Oh, don't worry about that."
"But you should worry about what happens next." Nicole stepped forward. "Justin, we need to."
"No, you need to listen," I said, turning back to David.
I did some digging. "Turns out your wife works for the school board, doesn't she? Real respected in the community. Probably wouldn't want any scandals." David swallowed hard. "What do you want?" I grinned. "Glad you asked. You're going to end things with Nicole. Tonight.
You're going to tell her it's over, block her number, and never speak to her again."
Nicole made a noise of protest, but I kept going. "And if you don't?" I held up my phone.
"Well, I'm sure your wife would love to hear these recordings.
And see the video.
And, have a nice little chat with Nicole's boss about how their employee spends company hours."
David was already nodding before I even finished. "It's over," he blurted out. "It's done." Nicole turned on him. "David." "Sorry," he mumbled. "I can't do this anymore."
I turned to Nicole, watching her world collapse in real time. "I hope he was worth it," I said, and walked out. By the time I got home, I had already sent everything to David's wife. The next morning, Nicole woke up to find the locks changed and her belongings packed neatly in the garage. I didn't even need to say anything. She knew. Nicole stared at the boxes in the garage like they were part of some elaborate prank that just hadn't reached the punchline yet. She looked at me, then back at the neatly packed containers labeled clothes, shoes, random junk I don't care about. "You're joking," she finally said, voice flat. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Nope." She let out a sharp laugh, the kind people do when their brain refuses to process reality.
"Justin, come on. You seriously packed up my stuff?"
"Sure did," I said.
"Took me all night."
"You'd be amazed at how fast you can get things done when you don't have to stop and question your entire marriage."
Her face twitched. "Okay. We need to talk about this."
"No, you need to find a new place to live." I gestured at the boxes.
"And lucky for you, I've already taken care of the hard part."
She crossed her arms, mirroring me, like she thought this was some kind of negotiation.
"You can't just kick me out." Oh, I absolutely can. I pulled a stack of papers from the counter. Since your name isn't on the mortgage. And because I spoke to a lawyer before you even knew I was onto you. Her expression flickered between shock and outrage. A lawyer? Yeah. Turns out, when your spouse cheats, the court isn't exactly on their side. She pressed a hand to her forehead, exhaling through her nose like I was the unreasonable one. Justin, let's not do anything drastic. I laughed. Actually laughed. Nicole, you already did something drastic when you started sneaking around with a married man. She had the nerve to look offended. It wasn't like that. Spare me. I held up a hand. I've got the texts. The videos. The timestamps of every single time you worked late. I pulled out my phone and scrolled. Want to see? Or do you want me to send them to your entire contact list? She went pale. Yeah. That's what I thought. I let the silence stretch, watching as she scrambled to figure out her next move. Where am I supposed to go? She finally asked, voice tight. I shrugged. Not my problem. Maybe David's wife has a guest room. Oh, wait. I snapped my fingers. That's right, she left him. Because I made sure she got all the proof she needed too. Nicole's eyes widened. You told her? Of course I told her. You think I was going to let you two destroy 2 marriages and just walk away? Her jaw clenched. You're enjoying this. I tilted my head. Enjoying? No. But watching you finally deal with the consequences of your actions? Deeply satisfying. She grabbed her bag off the counter. You know what? Fine. If this is how you want to handle things, then whatever. I'll go. She stormed toward the door, stopping just long enough to turn back and give me one last glare. You're going to regret this. I smiled. Doubt it. And with that, she was gone. Now, most people would probably expect some big emotional moment here. Maybe I'd sit down and reflect on what went wrong, cry into a pillow, or stare dramatically out a window while sad music played in my head. But instead, I just grabbed a beer, plopped onto the couch, and turned on the game. Because, for the first time in a long time, I actually felt good. No more walking on eggshells. No more second guessing. No more living with someone who thought she could play me for a fool. And that? That was worth everything. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and rate the story in the comments.